time is really passing quickly. And you've heard that all of your lives, haven't you? Time is moving so very, very quickly. And so because time is moving so very, very quickly, how many speeches do you think you've heard where people talk about how you ought to make the most of every single day that we've been given? Have you heard speeches like that? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And how many books have been written about how we ought to live life to the fullest, and here are the ingredients, and here's how you do it. There's no telling how many articles I have copied on little hints on how to live life to the fullest. But in the book of Ephesians, there is one ingredient talked about over and over again that is essential to living a quality life. That is essential to making life one that would be lived very fully on this day. And you can see it in the title there. It has something to do with this word peace. Now, I've talked a lot about the kind of peace that resides in our heart, wherein we are more free, at least, from anxiety and worry. And that's important to living a quality life. And I have talked a lot, maybe not with specific words, but I've talked a lot about peace with God that comes only through Jesus Christ. We've talked a lot about salvation so that we are living in peace with God. That's important to living every day to the fullest. But neither of those is what I'm talking about today. I'm glad you're here. I'm not sure how to address what I want to say this morning. But I do know that if you and I are going to live today really well, and if we're going to live tomorrow really well, and if we're going to live next Sunday really well, we need to live in peace with other people. We need to live in peace with people who are around us, in our families, in our churches, in our communities, in our nation. Do you agree with that? And yet, as I say that, as I begin to say that, at least in my lifetime, we are more polarized in this nation than ever before. And I've said that so many times. We are truly polarized. Do you agree with that? Are we polarized on politics right now? Yes. And are there still polarizations that crop up all across our country regarding race? And are we polarized based upon social agendas, sexual identity, how to run a government? We're polarized on all those things and so many more. And the problem with polarization is this word that I want you to consider for a moment. Radicalism. I'm not even sure it's really a word. I just wrote it down and Burke put it up there. I guess maybe it is a word. But radicalism. Where that exists and polarization exists, we don't live in peace with other people very easily, and maybe not at all. Because in an environment of radicalism, people are hard, and people are demanding, and people are sharp, and people are unreasonable, and people will not listen. Now, have you ever known anyone like that? And sometimes I look in the mirror on certain subjects and I think hard, unreasonable, not listening, sharp. Do you know anyone like that? And when you have that, you can't have peace. In our nation at this very moment, what is the big issue? Why are they marching on college and university campuses? Why are they marching in the streets of major cities? Because there is this anti-Israel movement. And I am convinced that many people are in those streets and they're on those campuses and they don't have a clue why they're there. They just joined the crowd. But there are others there who are in that category and they are radical over things that they don't even understand. But they have this fixed opinion. So I ask you this. How many family environments have been made miserable or torn apart because of radicalism? On any kind of subject you can imagine. Because one person says it's going to be this way and I will not yield, I will not listen, I'll get angry if you talk about it. And how many churches have been split because of radicalism? And how many arguments over radicalism? And sometimes I'm right there in that category. But I'm beginning to realize from the book of Ephesians, you can't live a quality life. And listen carefully, you cannot live the way God wants you to live if you're going to be like that. So I wrote down this phrase this week. It had to be early in the week because I didn't have much time this week, but I want you to listen to this phrase and see if you could possibly think it's right. Having strongly held beliefs or convictions about something does not mean one has to be radical. You can have really strongly held convictions, but it does not mean that you have to be hard and you have to be sharp and you have to be disagreeable and you have to be demanding. And so I put another statement in. And I said, strongly held beliefs or convictions must be clothed in peace, or the better word is qualities of peace. Qualities of peace. Now again, relationships in any environment get destroyed so easily with radicalism. And you know what? You may have a position that is exactly right. Your conviction may be 100% right. But the way you handle it with other people can make it 100% wrong. And some people don't believe that. Some people think if I'm in the right, then I have the right to say it any way it needs to be said. Am I bothering you? Am I worrying you about this? What are those qualities of peace? Do you remember last week? Last week we were talking about Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 6, at least that was one part of it, where Paul says there's this great mystery going on. And the mystery is that the Jews and the Gentiles are members together through Jesus Christ in one body. And do you remember that we said that Jews and Gentiles don't like each other? They don't practice the same holidays. They don't eat the same diet. They have different traditions and different customs. And they spent generations fighting with each other. And now they're here in one body. And they both have strongly held convictions. And so Paul says, let me give you 4 qualities of peace that you got to always remember. In verse 2 of chapter 4. So look at them. Be completely humble, and you be gentle, and you be patient, and you bear with one another in love. And I want to take 2 at a time because I think the 2 at a time they go together. Humble and gentle. Can you have strongly held convictions or beliefs that are very different from someone in your own family, someone in your own congregation, and do that without being radical, and do it in a spirit of humility and gentleness? But be careful with the word humble. I talk about humility a lot, but normally I talk about that in contrast to pride. And I talk about how egotism destroys everything. And I can describe what ego out of control looks like. I can describe what pride looks like. And therefore I can contrast the humble part. But in the context of today's lesson, listen to how Paul deals with humility. It's in Philippians chapter 2, where he's talking about Jesus. This is so critical to having the right kind of lifestyle that makes every day really good. Paul will say in Philippians chapter 2 in the first verses, Jesus did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or something to be held on to. Now, you know what that statement means? It means that Jesus was God. It means that Jesus was fully God. He was in heaven. But he did not consider that something that he had to just hold on to. He didn't have to keep that position. And so what he did was, because it would be good for all of us, he made himself, he says, lower than the angels. In fact, he made himself like a man, which is really low. And he did it for our good. And Paul says that is humility. And what he says is, if you want to humble yourself, then what you do is you consider the opinions of others. And you consider the needs of others, and you even put those ahead of yourself, just like Jesus did. And you do it in a gentle type way. Now, I don't watch the news anymore. I just don't watch the news. Once in a while, I'll get a little snippet of it, but I won't watch it for very long. This week, I got a snippet of it. The streets of New York City. By the way, I talked about New York having a different culture from Oklahoma last week. And I missed the real life example we have here in our congregation. Jack is from New York. I mean, all I had to do was look and see how different he is. I mean, so I knew I'd work it in somehow, Jack, okay? So, but the police officers were lined up on the streets. They were in full body armor. They had face shields on. They were standing, it looked to me like this, tall and straight. And the protesters were walking by, and I saw this one woman protester walking by in the face of this police officer. And she was speaking to him, and you could tell animated gestures, loud. And she was shaking her fist, and she would walk away, and she would come back. And the police officer never moved. He never moved. She was the radical one who did not understand those 2 words. Perhaps he did. I want you to think again about two examples in the life of Paul. Now, these are really interesting examples that we sometimes let slip by because we fall into the trap of when we think we're right. We think we have the right. When we think we're right, we think we have the right to be sharp and hard and disagreeable and not listen. And in Acts chapter 15, Paul and Barnabas are in a Gentile city of Antioch. And you remember Paul was called to be an apostle primarily to whom? The Gentiles. He worked with both Jews and Gentiles, but he was in Antioch, which is all Jewish, which is all Gentile, and people are getting converted, but they hear about it down in Jerusalem and in Judea. And it says some Jewish people who have become Christians come to Antioch because they think they have to teach these Gentile Christians how to be good Gentile Christians. And these Jews who have become Christians have strongly held convictions about a variety of things. One, at the top of the list, is circumcision. Now, why wouldn't they have that strongly held conviction? Because they can trace it all the way back to Abraham. And so they march up there to Antioch like they're going to set the record straight, like they're going to tell everybody this is how God really wants it. And they start making demands. All of you Gentile Christians, you have got to be circumcised. Well, Paul and Barnabas also have strongly held convictions. And so they just take a trip down to Jerusalem. And they sit before the elders in that city of Jerusalem and the apostles. And they say, you cannot bind this on them. And the elders and the apostles think about it for a while and they say, we know you're right. We remember the story of Peter and Cornelius. We know the Gentiles can become Christians. We know all this. And we know this circumcision thing is unreasonable. But peace is important. Peace is so important. And even with strongly held convictions, sometimes you make concessions for peace. So they said, would you be agreeable, Paul, if we sent back a letter and we took some of those things out of the old law and say, okay, how about that you don't eat any food that was sacrificed to an idol? Now, Paul knows any food is okay. He knows that in the sight of God now, any food is okay. But Paul, would you be agreeable if we did it like this? And how about if we said abstain from any kind of sexual immorality? And how about if we said don't eat any meat from animals that have been strangled so that the blood is all still there? And Paul says, I understand what you're doing. Now I'm paraphrasing this. I understand the need to keep peace between two groups of people that are having such a difficult time being one. I can make those concessions. I can carry that kind of letter. And he does. And it's the last you hear of it. Now there may be more things that happen that are not put in print for us. But you see how Paul acts? I mean, he's marched all the way to Jerusalem to set this straight. And the leaders say, well, yeah, Paul, we understand, and you're right. You're totally right. But let's make this work. By the time you get to Acts chapter 27, Paul is back in Jerusalem again. Apparently, between 15 and 27, or chapter 21 rather, there have been a lot of years passed. And when Paul arrives, the leaders of the church say, Paul, well, we got to tell you, we know you've been doing some really good work. But the people here, They've been hearing how you've been out there with the Gentiles, how you've been converting Gentiles, and some of these Jewish Christians are really nervous and upset about this, and they don't really understand the full picture that God has. And they have some strongly held convictions and strongly held beliefs, and we know you do too. But this could be really bad. So Paul, we got 4 men over here that are about to take some vows at the temple. Would you join them? Would you shave off all your hair? And if you'd go ahead and take some of that money you've been making by making tents and pay their dues, then that might go a long ways to have peace. You know what Paul does? He rears up and he says, I'll guarantee you I will never do that. Everybody knows you don't have to do that. God wouldn't expect me to do that. In fact, I think God would think it's wrong. I will never do it. Paul didn't do that. He didn't do that. That would have been radical. And that would have caused so much problem. And Paul says, in essence, what would it hurt? My hair will grow back. And he goes and does it. Because he wants people to live in peace. He wants these people to come together. And he knows that the gospel of Jesus can't really reach the entire ends of the earth until there is peace in it. So let me tell you those last 2 words really quickly. Why would he put in patient and bearing with one another? Because people change at a very slow rate. And this Jew and Gentile thing, it's going to take a long, long time for it to change. And guess what? For all of us, to learn how to take our strongly held conviction, our strongly held belief, and be willing to listen to yours and listen to yours and be kind, waiting for you to move a little bit and me to move a little bit, that can sometimes take longer than we'd like for it to take. And so you can't give up quickly. You got to be patient. And you got to bear with people as they're moving a little bit. I tell people who are going to try to get into executive coaching and they're going to try to help people change. 5 degrees. 5 degrees. Just move 5 degrees and wait over time and see how wide the gap gets. You make a lot of progress. 5 degrees over a long period of time. It takes a long time. So then he says this. I want you to read these last 2 verses just to see how important what I'm saying is. Please be a people. In verse 3 he says, who make every effort. You make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. And it's not just Paul. Listen to what James says. But the wisdom that comes from heaven, the wisdom that comes from God, is first of all pure. Then it's peace-loving. And it's considerate. Now, just underline that word considerate for a moment. Because sometimes strongly held beliefs, I'm going to do it this way, and we don't consider the others. We don't consider other people. But the wisdom that comes from God is peace-loving, and it's considerate, and it's submissive. That means it's willing to concede to what you might need. It's full of mercy and good fruit, and it's impartial, and it's sincere. And peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. So which do you think is more important? To always be right or to live in peace in God's eyes? Well, right's important. But right's not so important that it gives you the right to destroy the relationship with other people. And if you want to live a happy day today, if you really want to be happy today, and if you want to be happy tomorrow, you'll have to live in peace with the people around you. That's all there is to it. When Susan and I are not living in peace with each other, we're both miserable. Now, I know you can't imagine that she has those days where she doesn't want to live in peace. Okay? But when we're not in peace with each other, life's pretty miserable. Okay? And when I'm not in peace with other people, our daughter, our son, life's pretty miserable. And when I'm not in peace with coworkers, life's pretty miserable. And one of the problems that really aches my heart is there are some people, no matter what I do, are willing to live in peace with me because they're radical. I want you to listen to that. There are some people who just don't like me and will never like me and never get along with me because they're just radical. And maybe it's my fault once in a while. It's not what God wants. He doesn't like radicalism at the expense of peace.